Maurice Hamilton, thanks so much for joining us on talkSPORT Driving YouTube page. You're here to tell us about your new book, F1 Cars. Tell our audience a little bit about it and what they can expect from the book.
Nice to see you, and nice to be here. The book is, because this is the 75th anniversary of Formula One. The very first Grand Prix was at Silverstone in 1950. We're celebrating that with the book by choosing 50 of the great Formula One cars across the 75 years. So it was quite a job actually choosing 50. It was the list could have been longer, but I've chosen cars that were significant during that period, starting with the Alfa Romeo that won the first Grand Prix in 1950, right up to a McLaren that won a Grand Prix last year. They've all won a Grand Prix. That's the significant thing about all 50. They've all played a significant part in Formula One, technically, because they've advanced it over the years. So what you're seeing is 50 cars, and it tells a story not just of the cars, but also how Formula One has changed. You'll see it as you look at the pictures. You'll see how it's developed, how the cars have become more sophisticated, how safety has become a factor, how the drivers are different, all of that. So it's kind of a social diary as well as a collection of 50 great Formula One cars.
You mentioned about how much the sport has changed there. Has there been a particular car during your career that has particularly changed the sport, do you think?
Probably there's two or three that actually fit into that category, but the one I think that people will remember most is the Lotus 79, which won the World Championship in 1978 with Mario Andretti. Now that introduced what they call ground effect, and that was a major step forward in enhancing the performance, the cornering power of a car, and that's stuck since. That's everybody else then jumped on the bandwagon and have developed it, and that has set the tone of Formula One. So that, I think, Lotus cars, Colin Chapman, the man who designed all the Lotus, he broke new ground everywhere and raised the bar with all his cars. So I think you could choose any. There's 4 Lotuses, I think, in the book, at least 3. I've got a job remembering now. but he was so significant that all of the Lotus cars were, in their way, he just thought out of the box. So they each set a standard which everybody else had to try and meet.
And you've covered over 600 Grand Prix in your time covering the sport. Have you got any particular favourites in terms of the cars from your years covering F1?
I think what I'd like to think is that people will look at the book and go through it and they'll suddenly go, I remember that. I love that car, and because that particular car will have done something for them. It may have turned them on to Formula One, or it may have been driven by their hero, or maybe they were at that race and they loved it and they thought, this is great, whatever. So for me, when I go through it, going back a little bit as I do, the Lotus that Jim Clark drove, the Lotus 49 in 1967, set new standards, as Lotus did, as I said, but was driven by Jim Clark, who was my hero. And I saw him win the 1967 British Grand Prix without realising, obviously, that it would be the last time we'd see him win a Grand Prix in England because, of course, he was killed the next year. So all of that, and it's a beautiful car anyway, so all of those things combined make that the standout car for me. But everybody will have their own different choice, I imagine.
And you will have covered and have got to meet and interview some of the biggest names from the world of the sport over the years. In terms of the drivers, are there any particular favourites that you've interviewed or met over the years?
Well, there's a lot of characters, and I think you tend to enjoy working with the characters. And so when I started off, my first full season as a professional writer was 1977, and James Hunt was the reigning world champion. And I got the job of writing his fanzine with him that year. So I had to work with him, which was quite a chore because he was quite a boy and it was hard to tie him down, I can tell you that. The things were not as regimented then as they are today. So starting with James, that was a heck of a start. But I think people that are characters like Mario Andretti, wonderful character, wonderful to talk to, terrific descriptions. But the guy that I think I felt most privileged to know during his lifetime as a race driver was Niki Lauda, because he was an extraordinary character, not just as a driver, not just as a man who came back from a near-death accident and carried through and won Grand Prix, but as a person, as a no-nonsense individual who quit Formula One, came back, won another championship. I mean, that's unheard of. And then ran his airline, had a plane crash that killed 200 people. He went into the middle of all of that and took on Boeing. So he was not just a character in racing, but also as a human being. And I felt very privileged to know him.
What was he like to interview? Because I'm guessing he could be no nonsense, maybe a bit blunt, maybe a little bit of a challenging interviewee sometimes.
All of the above. But the thing about him was, if he thought that you hadn't done your preparation, you'd get very clipped answers. No, yes, no. But if he thought you knew what you were talking about and you were answering sensible questions, the answers would be really thorough, thoughtful, and he had a clear opinion about everything. So even if you weren't doing an interview, and when he was helping run the Mercedes team with Lewis Hamilton, if there was an issue in the paddock, and you as a journalist were trying to decide, well, you've heard this side of the story, I've heard that side of the story, I don't quite know which way to go with this. You'd go to Nicky and say, listen, Nicky, you know what's happening, what do you think? And he'd go, very simple, and he'd just give you the explanation, bang, 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 and you go, you're right, of course. He'd see things very clearly, so he was a wonderful person to talk to from that respect.
I'm guessing a lot of people, a lot of our audience would have probably watched the film that Ron Howard did about James Hunt and Niki Lauda's incredible title battle, and it's interesting hearing what you say there about how forthright Niki was, because I've read a book recently and they say a similar thing about Michael Schumacher. If you'd done your research with Michael Schumacher, give you a great answer, but if you didn't and you didn't really recognise your face or felt like you were trying to trip him up, then he would very much give you a short and sharp answer and make a little bit of a fool of you.
Yeah, I think like in all things you have to be professional, because the drivers are professional, their time is valuable, they don't want to waste it being asked stupid questions. And I mean with Lauda, going back to Niki Lauda, I was told when I did my first interview with him, a friend of mine another journalist introduced me to him. Before he did that, he said, now look, the chances are when I introduce you to him and you're going to ask for an interview, he might just say do it now. And that's to put you on your toes to see how you are. And that's exactly what he did. It was in the pit lane in Detroit. It was chaos going around just after a practice session. And he just said, okay, do it now. And luckily I had my tape recorder and my questions and I was able to do it. And he goes, okay, very good. So that was all right. But that's what he would do. He would put you to the test. And if you passed that test, you were all right. And I think a lot of the drivers are exactly the same.
A lot of people are now interested in the team principles as a result of the Netflix series. In terms of the team principles that you've got to meet and speak to over the years, are there any ones that you really enjoyed speaking to?
I think, well, if I go right back, the very first team principal, they weren't called team principals then, was Ken Tyrrell, who ran Jackie Stewart's team. And he was a very no-nonsense former lumberjack, former timber merchant, I should say. And you had to have, again, all your ducks in a row if you're going to go and interview him, because he was he was very straight, and he would explain things to you. And I got to know him well, so that made life very easy for me. But it was a pleasure to know him. Through to people like Ross Brawn, lovely guy to talk to. But again, you have to have all your ducks in a row with that and know what you're going to talk about. I think Toto Wolff was when I was writing a book about Niki Lauda after his passing. Toto Wolff was very, very helpful and told me some wonderful stories. But again, you have to be able to prove that you know what you're talking about. And if you do that, you'll get the proper answers back. And
we know that F1 has been full of no-nonsense characters over the years. Has there been anyone in terms of either team principals or drivers that if you knew you were interviewing them, you think, oh gosh, I'm a little bit worried about this one. Maybe stroke a little bit of fear into your heart?
I think, actually, you mentioned Michael Schumacher. Michael was, again, if you were going to ask silly questions, you would get a pretty blunt answer. So you'd have to have your homework done before you got there. And on one particular occasion, it was a very quick interview. I'd been asked to do it, and I quickly jumped in, and I hadn't really put a lot of thought into it. And the answers were pretty short and monosyllabic. And it was my own fault, but it just showed that you have to be on your toes.
And we're talking off the back of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. It's been an incredibly exciting season. What have you made of it from your perspective and the various different battles that we've seen, certainly at the front of the grid?
I just love the fact that we've got the McLaren drivers equal. And I love the fact that McLaren are letting them race. I think that's terrific, because one of the worst periods I had when I was doing commentary for BBC 5 Live was in the early 2000s when Ferrari and Michael Schumacher were dominating. And when the two Ferraris started from the front row, you knew that Michael Schumacher was going to win because Rubens Barrichello had been told that's the way it is. With McLaren, you don't know, and I like that. Now, whether it'll remain like that as we get towards the crux of this season and they're still fighting for the lead of the championship, which I think they probably will be, that's going to be a different story. But then that's all part of it. So I think I am enjoying the variety of this season. And look at the race we had in Azerbaijan. I mean, the McLaren were nowhere. So it shows that it is up and down. It's not all plain sailing all the way through, because the Azerbaijan circuit didn't suit the McLarens, and it's going to be the same, say, probably in Las Vegas, so they'll have a bit of a fight in their hands there. Going to Singapore, it should be more a McLaren circuit, so it might be back to situation normal, but we don't know, and that's the nice thing. It's been a very interesting season.
You mentioned about a bit of a nightmare that McLaren had at Azerbaijan, and obviously Piastri going out on the first lap, Lando not being able to fully capitalise that, only finishing 7th. Max Verstappen's won the last two. A lot of people thought up until the last race that maybe it was only a 2-horse race, but now Verstappen's 69 points away. Is it a 3-horse race in your view? Can we count out Max Verstappen yet?
Well, you can never count him out. I mean, he's just driving brilliantly, and I think a lot of the performances that we're seeing from him in Red Bull are largely down to him rather than the car. Yeah, he's fine-tuned it, but he's been doing phenomenal things, like his pole position lap at Suzuka, like the first lap at Imola when he overtook Piastri into the first corner. Amazing stuff. Only Max Verstappen could do that. Is he going to win the championship? It's a tall order because he's, 69 points behind. There's 7 races left. He needs to score 10 points more than Piastri per race. That is a very tall order. That's not to say he's going to not try. He will try hard. I think what I'd say is the past 2 races we've had, so that's Baku and Monza, have suited the Red Bull more than the McLaren. We're now going to go to Singapore, which has been the other way around. That's a more tight circuit, which should be more suitable to McLaren. If Verstappen wins there and the Red Bull is good there, then yes, I think it could be game on, but I'll wait and see till after that. But until then, I think McLaren guys are going to do it. The odds are in their favour. It's a bit late for this much welcome charge by Red Bull and Max Verstappen.
But if anyone can catch him up, it is Max, right?
He's the boy.
If anyone else who would be 70 points behind or 69 points behind at this point, you'd probably think, no, it's still going to be between Oscar and Lando. But because it's Max, everyone's maybe a little bit wary, considering past form, that he can produce the spectacular when he needs it.
Indeed. I mean, he's got nothing to lose, and he's got nothing to prove, and his driving is showing that, because it is relaxed. He's very calm, very cool. So even if, say, the 2 McLarens are on the front row in Singapore and he's on row 2, they will be watching him. They will know going into the first corner, you've got to watch him, because if he sees half a chance, like he did at Imola, he'll be in there and giving them a hard time, and it'll be hard to pass. Because the one drawback, and the one thing I don't like about the current cars, is it is very hard to overtake, which is completely wrong. That's a whole new story, which we won't go into. But if Verstappen gets ahead, he will be hard to overtake. So it could be game on again in that respect.
You mentioned how you still feel, though, it's McLaren's to lose between Piastri and Lando. Obviously, Piastri still leading at the minute. Lando about 25 points behind, I think, now. Out of those two, where do you see it going if it does end up being a battle between those two?
After what we saw in Baku, I don't know. I really don't know. Because I thought, this nip and tuck. They've both made mistakes. They both had good weekends and bad weekends. Lando Norris more slightly than Piastri. But Piastri, my goodness me, he caught up with the mistake point of view at the weekend, didn't he? 3 very basic mistakes. Most uncharacteristic. I just don't know what was going on there. And it was as if he made the first mistake. I think what's happening actually in a way is that when Piastri came to Baku and there were the press conferences on the Thursday, all the questions were about what had happened at the previous race in Italy. And it was all about assuming he was going to win the championship, because at that point he was 31 points ahead. And everybody was talking as if he's going to win the championship. That's pressure, because you start to think like that. If you remember back to 2009, when Jenson Button was leading the championship, won a clatter of races, And then suddenly he starts to lose it because he's overthinking it. Because everybody's saying, oh, you're easy, you're going to win the championship. And he's going, well, no, it's not that easy, actually. And look what happened. He nearly lost it. He didn't, thankfully. But I think Piastri, maybe that was a consequence of being under pressure, although without actually showing it, but under pressure to do something, because everybody's saying, well, you're going to do it, aren't you? It's easy. And he's saying, well, actually, it isn't easy. And then he went and proved it.
We talk about one British driver at the front in Lando, someone who hasn't quite had the season he would have hoped for, be Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari. This kind of the dream move almost gone wrong to an extent. He looks so despondent when you look at him in his post-race interviews, particularly after Azerbaijan. He was hopefully hoping to be on the podium, only finished 8th. How much do you feel for Lewis with everything he's gone through this season? How despondent he almost looks with the sport and his own form?
It's a bit of a mystery, I have to say. I'm very sad to say it, as you've hinted, because he's under a lot of pressure. You know, he's gone to Ferrari. He's earning a lot of money. There's the pressure of being a Ferrari driver because it's not easy, because they have a national daily paper in Italy, and one page is devoted to Ferrari every day. So they're going to write something. So that if you're having a bad time, they're going to pick on that and show it. So I'm sure he's beginning. The honeymoon period is long gone. He's now under pressure to perform. He's up against in a teammate, Charles Leclerc, who is on a lap-for-lap basis, Max Verstappen included, probably the fastest guy out there. He really is quick. So Lewis is up against his very fast teammate who's established at Ferrari. Yeah. He knows how it all works. On top of that, Lewis has come having been with Mercedes, a certain car, a certain way of driving that car, different brakes on the Ferrari to the McLaren. That makes a difference, because when their brake distances are 120 metres or something like that, going into a corner, you've got to be confident. You've got to know that when you put your foot on the brake pedal, the car's going to stop. And if you've got your doubts, you're going to maybe just back off a little bit. And all of these things are contributing to him not performing as he would want, and then it builds up. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's his 19th consecutive Formula One season. He's 41 now? I'm beginning to wonder, is the time beginning to tell? I think the crucial point will be next year, as you know, 2026, we've got a clean sheet for all the cars, and it will be a different type of Ferrari he's driving, and hopefully he will be able to manage it better than this one. If that doesn't work, I think that's it. It's all over. It's
interesting what you say there, because we had Anstead on the page a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying he felt like Lewis almost needed a difficult season maybe. And when you look at the regulations that are coming in next year, do you seriously think it is kind of almost do or die for Lewis? It's a crossroads moment for him, where he either, if he has an amazing season or he does quite well, it might be enough to tempt him to stay on. But if it goes the way it has done this year for him, it could be the last we might see him in F1.
I think you're right. I think it's all hanging on 2026, because it's not going to happen in 2025 the way things are going. So I think he's looking for this clean sheet of paper, fresh start, different cars. Nobody knows how they're going to be, but we know they're going to be different. And he's hoping that it'll get more, give him a car that he feels more at home in than the current car. And if that doesn't work, that's it. No, there's no point in continuing. He won't be able to. He won't allow himself to do it, because having been through all he's been through, you think of the great stuff he's done and the glory days he's had, 105 Grand Prix wins, to struggle behind like that, he'll hate it. So I think it'll be bye-bye if that doesn't work.
And lastly, outside of the top teams that we've spoken about, it's been quite an exciting season up and down the sort of the grid, because you've had Carlos Sainz finishing third in Baku, you've had Nico Hülkenberg finishing on the podium at Silverstone, Liam Lawson's had a good race at Baku, finishing in the top 5. You've had some of the other lesser known teams scoring points this season. So to finish, who's been your maybe unsung hero this year? Or you've even got people like Hadjar doing very well at racing balls, and has been talked about as potential Red Bull teammate for Max Verstappen next year. Has there been anyone that's been a real almost unsung hero for you this year?
I think Hadjar has been a revelation. If you think about what happened to him at the first race, going to the grid, and he spun off and crashed, on his debut, the poor guy was distraught. And yet he's come back from that and got a podium finish. He's been quick. He's been quicker than Tsunoda He's been, just not Tsunoda. He's just been quicker than his teammate, and well, until recently. But I think he's shown all the qualities for a young driver to be a man of the future. The other one that's impressed, and particularly, I'm not just saying that because of what happened in Baku when Carlos Sainz finished third, because he's had a pretty awful first half of the season through no fault of his own largely, but the Williams team have been getting better and better and better. And the interesting thing is they're focusing, by their own admission, on the 2026 car. They've stopped developing this car, and there they were in the front row of the grid. So I think that's been a great surprise and a pleasant surprise, because Williams has got such a great heritage, and James Vowles is turning it around, as he said he would. He said it was a long-term thing, but he is. It's very good to see, and I've enjoyed that aspect of it.
That's great, Maurice. Thank you so much for your time. Our audience, you can go and get Maurice's latest book, F1 Cars, available to buy now. And thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
My pleasure, Bradley.